Hey guys, working on a 2011 Toyota Sienna XLE. We're doing a front brake job on this. It's actually my dad's personal car, and every time I brake, it wobbles. The steering wheel wobbles a lot. I do know that he has a tendency to have a heavy foot when it comes to braking, so I know the rotor's wrapped. So I am planning on changing the rotor and as well as the pads, and just wanted to make a quick video on how to take apart all this stuff, the tools that we need in order to get this all taken apart, and then go ahead and install new parts, the rotors and pads. I do have the rotors and pads right there. It's from AutoZone. The reason why I'm using AutoZone is because they have the 2-year warranty on the rotors and obviously lifetime pads, and I have a feeling that within a year or so my dad's gonna obviously warp this rotor again, the new rotor obviously. So AutoZone does have a good warranty to go ahead and take those parts in and replace it for free. So total charge for those parts were $170, the pads and the rotors. So the rotors are like $76 a piece, and the pads were like $40, so plus tax. So we're gonna go ahead and take this apart. I do want to show you guys exactly how to take this apart if you're planning on doing this at home. If you have never done a Toyota Sienna brake job in the front, things you need is obviously get your car jacked up on jack stand. I have it on jacks on both sides. On the front, I have the car on raised up. There is a jack point in the front, so I do have a jack currently right there at the jack point where I lifted the car. I do have some stoppers in the back. Make sure you have stoppers to stop the car when you're lifting the car. Obviously the car is going to move, so make sure you have something back there to stop the wheels. I do have the e-brake on as well, so I have that as extra insurance. E-brake's on, car's not moving, got the car on jack stands. Make sure safety's first, so car lift it up first, make sure it's on stance, make sure the car's not moving, and then we can go ahead and start on the brake pads, the caliper, and the rotors. First you need is obviously wrenches. I do have I wanted to grab some basic tools as possible for those who don't have like a gun or impact guns to take apart the bolts and stuff like that. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna use a 14 to take the caliper out. That's what these two bolts are for. They're size 14 millimeters. So I have the 14 millimeter, then also have a 17 for the bracket, which I'll show you guys as we begin on this. I do have a bucket that's to rest the caliper on the bucket because we're not gonna let it dangle. You can get this bucket at Harbor Freight, or even Home Depot sells buckets, empty buckets. I mean, that's, again, you don't need a bucket. You can use something else that can, have a little bit of height to support the caliper. So I'm using a bucket just because it's easier for me. I do have brake grease and also AutoZone brake cleaner for when I go ahead and install new parts. So first what we're gonna do is you get the caliper out, then we're gonna go ahead and take the bracket out, and then we're gonna take the rotor out. And I wanna show you guys exactly how we're gonna go ahead about doing that, and then I'll show you guys how to install the new parts. And I believe the torque specs on the caliper is usually around like 27, and the bracket is around like 57, 60. I usually do it around 60 for the bracket, so the two bolts in the back. So let's go ahead and begin. I'm going to go ahead and take apart the caliper, the bracket, and then the rotor. So I'm going to start with the 14. Let me set the camera aside and get this all pointed correctly for you guys. 14 millimeter. Lefty loosey, righty tighty. All right, it's not coming out. Hey guys, so I have to grab a small one just because this is bending a little bit. So make sure you have some proper tools. I mean, you can use a long one. Sometimes it's better to have a small one as well. I have my little breaker bar. I'm going to use a small one and get this loose. You got one bolt, two bolts. Set it aside. take your caliper out, set it aside. Make sure you have something to catch the brake, the rust and stuff, so you don't make a mess on the floor. That's what I like to do. I'm sure some people like to do it outside and don't care about the mess, but if you're doing indoor, make sure you have something to catch the mess. Then you got your little springs here. Let me get up. Set that aside. I mean, the pads are somewhat okay, but we are replacing everything just because we're gonna install new parts, and obviously the new parts have 2-year warranty on it. I don't know exactly what the other side looked like, so that's why I'm just gonna go ahead and replace everything. Since that's out, now I'm gonna go ahead and take out the bracket. If anybody want to know where I get these tools from, this breaker bar is actually from Harbor Freight. This is a 3/8 one. I also have a 1/2 inch one for like the impact tools and stuff. But you can even get it from your local auto shop, like AutoZone, Napa, even Advanced Parts. Just your basic tools. So 2 17mm are out there in the back to hold the bracket. That's what they look like. Got your bracket out. And now for this, you do need a hammer. You normally don't need a hammer to get this out. Sometimes they do come out right away, but this looks like it's been on here for a while, and it is an Illinois car, and I mean salt and everything gets involved, so sometimes you do need to get a little aggressive and get this out. I do recommend putting like the lug nut on here, in case when we do go ahead and start smacking it from the back, that it doesn't fly out. This is too good to hold a rotor in place. So I'm gonna go ahead and bang this and try to get this out. If I have to get aggressive, I may have to get a different ounce hammer to get the rotor out, and obviously smack it from the back. But let's hope that I can get it off with this. That's what I'm talking about. You gotta have this so it catches everything. There you go, rotor's out. And I'm pretty sure this rotor's warped. And to tell how the rotors warp, obviously when you're braking, obviously this car, when it was braking at 40 miles per hour, it was the steering wheel was shaking violently. I personally drove it last week to get something, and it wasn't safe. And then of course my dad drove it in the rain, and the brakes weren't applying properly, so I knew right then that the brakes needed to be changed. So that's one way to say to tell if the brakes are, if the rotor's warped. The other way is to say to figure out, there is a gauge where you put it on the rotor and then spin the wheel. The rotor obviously, and it'll tell you exactly where the dial gauge is moving. I personally don't have that tool. Something I need to invest in, but that's if you do have that, you can go ahead and tell it, from there where, if it's moving, then exactly the rotor's moving in a certain spot, that basically saying that it's worked. I'm sure there's other ways, but those are the two that I know of. But what I'm going to go ahead and do right now is I'm going to clean this up. You can use a brush, a wire brush, to clean this up, just to get the, enough stuff out, just so you have a clean surface. I do have a drill with a wire brush, which I'm gonna use on here just to get enough rust out of there. All right, so I got this from Harbor Freight again. They look like this. You can just use this on the spindle and just to get enough rust as much as possible out. Again, another Harbor Freight tool. It's a drill for basic stuff. To something like this, it's perfect. I'm gonna use a small one just so I can get in there and then clean this out. Right, so that's clean enough. I just wanted to get as much as possible out, just because when I install new water, I don't want to get stuck. So now I do have the new rotor. Got it from AutoZone. And before I install this, I am going to apply some anti-seize on the spindle. So in the future, when I go ahead and install this, a new brake job or anything like that, I just want to make sure that it doesn't rust out and get stuck. You don't have to apply a lot, just enough in there. And then also, when you're going to install a new rotor, make sure that you are cleaning this rotor out with a brake cleaner, in case there's any grease or contamination or anything like that. Also wear a mask. I'm not, with that dust from cleaning. It's making it a little hard to breathe, but yeah. So I have a paper towel as well, because now it starts to get a little, hands will start getting greasy a little bit or dirty, because you're going to be cleaning the bracket and then applying some grease on it. You just want to make sure you have some gloves as well. If you're not, I mean, these are some crappy gloves, already got holes in it. So I'm going to start applying grease on the parts, just so that parts move freely. And we're going to double check everything to make sure everything's moving freely before we're going to go finally install everything. So I'm going to start with the bracket. I'm going to go ahead and clean this up. A lot of times you get brake kits from, like, let's say Rock Auto and stuff like that. They'll give you new hardware and stuff. We don't need new hardware just because these are not damaged. I'm gonna go ahead and clean this out pretty good with a brush, and then brake clean it, and then apply grease, and then we should be good to go. So, reverse process, all the stuff, the way you took it out, everything goes back the same way. So you also need a torque wrench. I got a Tecton from Amazon. They're not that expensive. And I am going to torque this to like around 60. I believe factory's around 57 or so. I mean, 60 is not bad. So, so the two bracket bolts are going to be torqued down to 60-ish. Now, if you don't have a torque wrench, can you do it without it? Yes and no. Is it recommended? No, but you can have it push, tighten it enough to a point where you know it's on there pretty good. But it's good to have a torque wrench. I've done it personally without a torque wrench in the past. Just tighten it not hard enough where you know that you feel like, okay, it's on there pretty good. You know it's not gonna come out, but that's, you know, if you don't have a torque wrench. But I highly recommend you invest in a torque wrench if you don't have one. I mean, this was like 30-40 bucks off Amazon. You can buy one from locally, or you can even rent one from AutoZone and get your money back. But again, if you're going to be working on cars, good to have a torque wrench. Again, this is a 3/8 one, Tecton. Got this from Amazon about 4 or 5 years ago. It's been great to me, so good to have. The next step, I usually take these out, clean them, get the old grease out of this thing, put new grease on here, make sure there's no rust on here, because these have the tendency to get locked up. You want to make sure these are freely moving parts, because if these get locked up, then your brake pads are getting locked up, and that's not good to have. That's how you get like caliper locks and stuff like that. So you can get this grease from AutoZone. I got this from AutoZone. I believe it's like $8. The reason why is because I've done enough brake jobs. So I use these. It's just so I have grease on the parts. So you want to make sure these are freely moving. Because if they don't, then you got brake wear on one side and not the other side, and then it just brakes weird. That's not what you want. So I'm gonna go ahead and spray the caliper on the outside. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is grab the pads, and then we're going to go ahead and install the pads. And before I install the pads, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and apply grease to the end of the pads, just so that these parts have a tendency to move back and forth. So you want to make sure that there is some grease and let it move freely. And just slide them in. And I don't know if you can tell the difference, but let me show you guys in 1 second. These were your old. These are your new. The bottom one's new. The other top one is the old. You can tell that's halfway done. But we're replacing. I mean, I can technically somewhat use this and change the brake pads out next year, around March, April, or something like that. But since I'm seeing the rotors out, I'm just gonna go make sure that everything's brand new, so he has a peace of mind, just so he has new pads and rotors. So that's why we're doing this. And then once you're installing it, obviously, the way of the rotor is sitting, you want to make sure that obviously the rotor's in a circle. You want to make sure it sits in the way it's you're following that direction. You don't want to like just install it incorrectly, and then obviously it's just causes more problems. So you want to make sure you're installing and following the path of the rotor. All right, so the pads are in. The next step is to go ahead and put this piston in. Before I do that, I'm just gonna spray some brake cleaner on it. Sometimes there's dust in here, and obviously I'm getting dust on the new parts. So the way to push this in, you want to use your old pad and push it against the caliper. And you do have a tool. You can get this from AutoZone. It was like 20 bucks. There are other tools in the market out there to push this in. Since this is a dual, we can use this as well. We can start with the single side, one side. Let me push this in first, and I'll show you how I do the other one. Just push it a little bit in. Move to the other side. Go ahead and push that in. Loosen it. So the piston's in. Just go, push this in, then push this in, then push it in, and then just try to get it as much in as possible, just so you can go ahead and sit on this thing. Get the caliper set on the new pads. Another thing to know, to do, I totally forgot to mention before I started this, is to leave your the master cylinder cap off. Just because when you're pushing the fluid back in, you want to make sure that the fluid gets pushed in, and that if there's any air in the system, which in this case it's not, but obviously you want to, if there's any air in the system, you want to go ahead and push that air out. That's why, a lot of people, whenever you're doing a brake job, you want to make sure that the master cylinder, the cap is off. So that way that when you're pushing the fluid back towards the master cylinder, that if there's any excess air or anything like that, it gets pushed out. So make sure that you always have that cap open. I do have that cap open, forgot to show you guys in the video, but just wanted to bring that up before we go ahead and install the caliper back on this. So caliper's pushed in. Make sure, make sure you get your springs in as well. This is going to push the pads out to relieve the tension. So I may have to use two hands here. One hand to hold and one hand to get the caliper on here. There you go. Some rust, just spray it, clean it, so you have some clean parts. So we do have this inner bolt keep moving. That's why it's not tightening it. So I'm gonna go ahead and get a wrench really quick. I think that's a 14 as well, maybe a 15. So I grabbed the 18. The 14 wasn't working. Get in there enough. Well, don't do that. But it's on there. Now to torque it down. So this is around like 27, 25. So I'm just gonna do 28-ish. What am I doing? All right, apparently the 18 wasn't working. Worked before. It's not catching it. I think it might be a 19. Or it could be a fat wrench. There we go. So I take it back, misinformation. It is a 17, it's a thin to get it in there. All right, so bottom one's tight, top one's tight, 28 torque. The back bracket ones are about 60-ish. I think it's around 57, 58. I did a 60 foot-pounds of torque. So the driver's side is done. Just wanted to give you guys from the beginning to the end. We went ahead and took this out, replaced the pads, took the bracket out, replaced the rotor, installed a new, cleaned up in the back the spindle, installed a new rotor, installed the bracket, torqued it down to 60, and then installed the pads, installed the two springs, the V's that goes on the pads to relieve the tension, and then we went ahead, cleaned up a little bit, and then applied grease to the bolts, make sure these parts are moving back and forth. And then we went and installed the new bolts, and then that's torqued down to 28. And that's how you get your front brakes done. It's the same steps on the driver's side. So when you're doing it, take your time, don't rush. I was rushing a little bit just so I wanted to capture this on the video and try to make this video as short as possible. But you guys get the idea of how to go ahead and do front brakes on a Toyota Sienna. This is a 2011 Toyota Sienna XLE model, but there should all be the same way of doing the front brakes. So make sure you guys have the proper tools, and then obviously safety first. Make sure your car's jacked up and it's on jack stands, and that you have enough space to do what you need to do to get this job done. So thanks for following, guys. If you have any questions, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please leave me comments. I will be happy to assist you with whatever the questions you may have. And if you aren't following my channel, go ahead, please subscribe, hit that subscribe button. Obviously there's going to be more videos in the future on jobs like this, or brake jobs on different cars, or something different that you may be questioning that I may be working on, that be helpful. So hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, guys, and have a wonderful day.